Picture this. You've just been handed a launch date that you didn't set for a product that isn't totally ready. And there's a CEO who is absolutely convinced that the market is waiting. And somehow your job is to figure it out and make it work. And if your stomach just dropped a little, then yeah, you've probably been there. And look, if you haven't been there yet, just wait because this one finds everybody eventually. Welcome to Spark Sessions. I'm Lori Tyler. I am a fractional chief marketing officer. I'm the founder of Ignite Marketing, and I am your host. And today we are talking about one of the most uncomfortable, but I think one of the most common and honestly, one of the most under discussed situations in B2B marketing, which is being asked to launch a product that isn't ready. So, we're going to talk about what it really costs, how to protect yourself and your team, and the playbook that I have built for getting through it. So, let's go. So, first, let's just call it what it is because the thing is, I think a lot of people spend so much energy trying to solve the problem that they never really stop to look at it in the face. A premature launch isn't just a product problem, it is a trust problem, it is a positioning problem, and it's really a team morale problem at the end of the day. And if it goes badly enough, it's going to be a brand problem. And it could be all those problems all at once. And you're standing right in the middle of it all. So let's set the scene. You know what the product can't do yet. And you've probably already had the conversation, probably more than once. And you have probably raised your hand and said, "Hey, I don't think we're ready to launch this yet." And you were told the timeline is fixed and the board wants it, or, sales has already been promising this, and there's a conference, or there's a fiscal year, or there's a competitor move, or whatever the reason, the date is the date, and you need to move forward. So you go back to your desk and you open a blank document and you stare at it because your actual brief is trying to build genuine market excitement for something that just isn't fully baked. And you have to do it without overpromising to customers who is going to hold you to every single word, and without demoralizing the product team that, they know exactly where the gaps are, and without sending your sales team into customer calls or prospect calls that are set up to fail. And I mean, when you lay it out like that, it's honestly a little impressive at how many things can actually go wrong at once. And so, you know, here's what I want to say before we get into the playbook. There is no version of a premature launch where everything goes perfectly. Anyone who tells you otherwise hasn't actually gone through one. But what there is a way to navigate it that limits the damage and that protects your credibility and that does set your business up to recover faster. So those are all the things that we want to talk about. And so real quick, one more thing before you get into the playbook. I just want to spend a few minutes also on why this keeps happening, because once you understand the root causes, you can start to get ahead of it in future cycles. And maybe more importantly, right now, you can stop internalizing it as a personal failure because it is not. So, one of, I think, the most common root cause issues is pressure from the top that has nothing to do with the product. Board timelines and investor commitments and fiscal year targets, like all those things are real. And they don't care when the product is ready. And so leadership makes a call that the business needs the revenue or the market presence or, whatever. And the date gets locked and it needs to be, when the product is as ready as it's going to be. You know, this is all as old as product marketing itself. And you're not the first person that this has happened to. And I know that because this exact scenario has happened to me many, many times. Another super common root cause is, sometimes it's just people being overly optimistic. The people building the product genuinely believed that they would be ready and the product would be ready. And then they just weren't. And by the time marketing has the full picture of what it's actually going to look like on launch day, the release is already in motion. The campaigns are already built. The PR is scheduled. Like unwinding it is going to cost more than just pushing through. And so you end up just pushing through. And there's also sometimes this gap between what marketing needs and what product delivers. Because the thing is, as marketers, we need a narrative, we need a value proposition, we need proof points. Like someone just give us something real to say. And sometimes what product hands you is a feature list and a 2-week runway to make something of it. And the story just isn't there yet, but the launch is. And sometimes you're just working in a culture where raising concerns gets you labeled as difficult, And so I will be the one to say it out loud because I do think somebody has to. In some organizations, if you push back on a launch timeline, you are seen as the problem. You are not seen as being the business partner. You're seen as being an obstacle. And so marketing leaders sometimes feel like they have to quietly absorb the risk rather than fight a battle that they know they are not going to win. And that has real consequences for the leader, for the team, and ultimately for the launch. And at the end of the day, these are all problems that you have to face and you have to navigate. So let's figure it out. Okay. So this is what I wanted to get to is the playbook, these 5 principles based on my experience, having lived through all of these things. These are not pie in the sky. Yeah, I've lived through every single one. And I feel the pit in my stomach too, just thinking about all this. So, okay. So principle 1 is to get brutally honest about what you actually have to take to market. So before you write a single line of copy, before you brief anybody, you need to know exactly what the product can do. And equally as important, what it cannot do right now. So not the roadmap, not the vision deck, not what it's going to be in Q3. That will come. That story will come, but you need to know first and foremost what exists today that a real customer can use and get real value from. And I know this sounds really obvious, but what actually happens is, in reality, marketing gets handed a brief and it describes what the product will be. And we run with it and the product ships and the customer tries it. And then the gap between what was promised and what was delivered creates a massive trust problem. And it can take months, maybe years to repair. And so you really need to sit down with product and push and ask the uncomfortable questions and get really specific and make sure that you are building your messaging only from what is true right now. The roadmap, what's coming later, what what is coming in Q3, that can all inform your vision story, but it can't be your proof points. Principle two is to reframe the launch and not try to hide the gap. So, what's really tempting, I think, is to try to oversell what you have and hope that nobody notices that there's a gap until the gap's been closed. And I get that instinct, to a certain extent, but I also know exactly how it ends up. And trust me, sophisticated buyers, which I'm sure you're dealing with, they will notice immediately. And the moment that they do, you will have lost their trust before you have a single conversation. And so the better move, and I think the braver move, is to really own the narrative and position the launch as a milestone, as getting early access, as a foundational release of additional things to come. It's the first chapter of something bigger. It's language like um, built for where you're going, or the platform that grows with you. That lets you tell a more honest story about momentum, without over promising on where things stand today. And it gives you an opportunity to keep giving things to the market, to keep your story going for a longer period. And, obviously that is going to require a CEO who is willing to play the long game. They need to understand the importance of brand trust instead of trying to chase short-term buzz. And that's part of your job. Part of your job then right now is to make that case internally with the real stakes that are on the table before the launch, not after, because after is going to be too late. Okay, principle three is protecting the sales team with radical honesty. Because here's what I've seen kill a premature launch faster than almost anything else. And it's when a sales team has been overbriefed on vision, but underbriefed on reality. Because they're going to end up walking into a customer call and leading with capabilities that don't exist yet. And then the customer is going to ask a follow-up question, and then the call is going to fall apart. And then marketing is going to get blamed for a product problem. So you need to brief your sales team on exactly what the product does today and give them clear, confident language for handling the gap honestly without overpromising on what's coming and when, and really equip them to have a great first conversation about what exists right now. Because what I know to be true is the sales team that will go in with eyes wide open will close way more business than the ones who go in oversold and underprepared. Principle four is to document everything in writing. And yes, I also call this the CYA principle. And this is another thing that nobody talks about, and I think everybody needs to hear. Because when you're operating in a no-win situation, you need a paper trail. You just do. Not because you're building a case against anyone, but because when a premature launch has mixed results, and it will, memories get really selective really fast. And suddenly marketing overpromised. And suddenly the messaging was off. And suddenly nobody remembers the 6 conversations that you flagged about all the product gaps. And when you did that, you were told to proceed anyway. Like, it happens all the time. And it is genuinely maddening. So, yeah, you just have to protect yourself. I do it by sending recap emails after key conversations and key decisions and document the constraints that you were given to work with it and capture what was and what wasn't available at launch. And that's going to protect you and it's going to protect your team. And it also makes sure that the post launch debrief is grounded in what actually happened and maybe not based in some people's selective memory. Principle 5 is building the recovery plan before you need it. And hopefully you won't need it at all. But, let's think about the what ifs. So I think this is a move that really separates the experienced marketing leaders and marketing teams from everybody else. And honestly, I think it's one of the things that I'm the most proud of when I've had the presence of mind to actually do it is planning the post launch recovery before the launch ever even happens, because you need to make sure that you're not letting emotions get in the way. Because here's the thing, that there's a gap, that some customers are going to bump into it. And so plan for it. Plan for it now while you still have the headspace. What does the follow up communication look like? What does the product, how does product help you communicate the progress to some of these early customers? And who is going to own the what's coming up next cadence? Think about all these things, plan for all these things. I think the organizations that will recover faster from a premature launch that maybe doesn't go very well, they treat these types of customer communications as an ongoing process, not a one-time launch event. So build that in from day one, build that into your entire launch planning, because it's your credibility and it's the company's credibility that will be in a much better place on the other side of all of this. And I just want to add one more thing before we close too. And it's a conversation that a lot of marketing leaders know that they need to have and end up talking themselves out of. But here's the thing, you have a responsibility to go on record before the launch, not to stop it, not to win an argument, just to make sure that the business is walking in with eyes wide open about the risks. And that usually looks like sitting down with your CEO or your leadership team and calmly, no drama, calmly saying, here's what we have. Here's what we don't have yet. Here's what I think the market risk is if we move forward on this timeline. And here's what I need from you to navigate it as best as possible. You're not the product police. You're not the timeline blocker. You're the person in the room who understands what it's going to cost when you make a promise to the market that can't be kept. And that perspective is very valuable and it deserves to be said out loud. And look, if the answer is still the date is the date and we're still doing this, then okay. You've done your job. You have flagged the risk. You've put it on the record. And now you go and you execute with everything you've got. And that is what leading through a no-win situation with your integrity intact actually looks like. And it's not glamorous, but sometimes it's the job. So look, if you're in the middle of one of these right now, I just want you to know you're not alone. You are not the problem. And there is a way through it. And what I genuinely believe is the no-win launch is or can be one of the most defining moments in a marketer's career, not because of what happens on launch day, but because of how you show up for your team and for the business and for yourself when you're in the middle of it. And the marketers who navigate these moments well with honesty and with their credibility intact, those are the ones who really build the kind of trust that lasts. So I hope that helped. If this one resonated, please share it with another marketer who needs to hear it. And if you have survived one of these, leave me a comment, leave a review, and let me know how you got through it. I would genuinely love to know. I will see you next time.